All right, I just wanted to end by touching a little bit on where I'm looking at taking some of my research in the future. This is a model of corn habitat that one of my students, Julia Clark, did actually in 47570 years ago. And what she showed was that if we look at the habitat of corn, where it's currently produced in the US, South America, Africa, Europe, some in Australia, and then we look at that under just going to 2070, so only 50 years from now. What this shows is with climate projections at that point is that the area to grow corn in the US is largely gone. Same thing with Southern Europe, large part of China. We're basically going to lose a lot of our ability to produce corn. Now, why that's important is because corn is the #1 food crop on the planet. So it's just representative of corn and then rice and what's the other one? I should know that. Is it soy? I believe it's soy are the big food producers. So if we lose our ability to produce corn, we're going to lose our ability to feed the planet. The other one that ties into that is oil production. There's a lot of concern over climate change from burning fossil fuels, and I'm concerned about that as well. But the big thing I'm actually concerned about is peak oil. Now, it's interesting with COVID-19 right now, because right now we've just done the biggest drop in oil consumption ever. Everything we've done to try and limit oil consumption has failed compared to COVID-19. And we've seen a lot of positives from that. However, when COVID-19 is over, my guess is we'll go back to business as normal, and we're going to see another jump in the consumption of oil. This is actually from the U.S. Energy Information Administration. So these are their estimates that on the current growth of oil consumption, when we are going to hit peak oil. Peak oil is where we can no longer increase our oil production. And if demand is still increasing, but the supply isn't, then we're going to see a peak in production, and then we're going to see a big increase in the cost of oil and oil-based products like gasoline. Now, the real problem with that is that when there's a shortage of oil, we take and we turn over large portions of our corn crop to ethanol production because it then makes sense financially. And this happened back in 2008 when there was an oil shortage. The price of gas went up between $4 and $5 a gallon. That made ethanol financially viable. So we increased our production of ethanol, and with that came increase in food prices, and with that came food riots. In all these countries, there were food riots because there was a shortage of food, and that was for a very short gap in oil scarcity. So this is a model I'm working on to try and put together these different issues, and I'm going to be making this a spatial temporal model, basically showing that oil is basically going to be gone by 2100. Currently, that's 35 gigatons per year of carbon that's going into the atmosphere. It's 85% of our energy, and this is from last year. And as I think you're all aware, that accumulates, greenhouse gases accumulate in the environment. That creates climate warming, and then that just comes back and has an impact, especially on farmland and timberland. This is important because there's this connection here. Farmland is where we both produce food and biofuel, corn ethanol. Forests are where we have trees for forests and other functions, including consumption of CO2 and converting it to oxygen. But it's also another source of biofuel. So both of these two, farmland and timberland, are used to create biofuel. The good news about biofuel is that it produces greenhouse gas, but then as the biofuel grows, the products that we use for biofuel grow, or trees grow for biofuel, that gets pulled back out of the atmosphere, so it's recycled. So this is a closed loop, very important, where this one is not. These fossil fuels accumulated millions of years ago, so once they're in the atmosphere, the way that they return is by being drawn into the ocean, dissolving into the ocean, and then settling out of the ocean onto the bottom of the ocean in sediment. However, that's only taking out about 30% of our emissions at this point. So there's a problem in that when this runs out, especially oil, at the end of this century, we're going to need to make up that difference through renewable energy, okay, wind, solar, those especially, geothermal to some extent, or with biofuels. Our population right now is slowing, okay, largely through education. The human population is no longer, our growth of human population is slowing, but it's still increasing. And folks are industrializing, using more and more energy. That's happening. So if we can slow that down, or use less energy, conserve it, that will help. Big thing is we need renewable energy. We need to roll our bulk of our energy production from fossil fuels over to renewable. That's going to require education, regulation, and incentives. Education about why this is important, regulation, especially on outputs of fossil fuels, carbon emissions, and then incentives like carbon credits and low interest loans and things to develop energy resources. And I'm going to be working on making this, like I said, a global temporal model that we can run simulations of what might happen under different scenarios. Thanks, and I hope everything goes great for you guys.